We look back at Visage as some kind of 80s supergroup because so many of the musicians involved in it later went off to enjoy huge success in other projects. Guitarist Midge Ure and keyboardist Billy Currie later joined forces to rejuvenate Ultravox. Rusty Egan and Steve Strange notoriously invented Clubland, and bassist Barry Adamson went on to become a successful musician, writer, and filmmaker. However, at the time, Visage was really the coming together of a loose collective of musicians, all dabbling in at least one other project, seemingly waiting for one of them to be successful. And when they came together, that success certainly happened in the form of Visage. The founding stars of the new romantic movement would produce an album from that scene, for that scene, and to announce that scene to the whole world. In 1978, Midge Ure, one of the three founding members of Visage, was between successful bands. He'd enjoyed big hits with Slick and Vienna was to come later, but back then he was playing and locking horns with Glenn Matlock in The Rich Kids, an act Matlock had set up after being thrown out of the Sex Pistols. Rusty Egan was in the band as well, and siding with Midge over wanting to take the band in a more electronic direction. Steve Strange, meanwhile, had done his best to become a face in the London punk scene, while fast becoming the face of a new scene, but was singing with a short-lived band called the Photons. It was this band's final showcase gig that led Ure and Egan to invite Strange along to record in some studio sessions at Manchester Square Studios, using some studio time owed to them by the Rich Kids record company. The trio looked around at some of the other bands who were producing the forward-thinking synth music that was inspiring both Midge and Rusty, and invited two members of the band Magazine to join the sessions: keyboard player Dave Formula and bass player Barry Adamson. While in the Rich Kids, Egan and Ure had already bought themselves a synth and a drum machine and had started work on some music together, and some of these tracks were recorded in these early sessions, including two covers. In the year 2525 by Zager and Evans, and Barry Maguire's Eve of Destruction, plus the instrumental track The Dancer. The demos were done. Now all they needed was a name. I came up with the name of Visage, Steve Strange claimed in his autobiography, Blitzed. Vis stood for the visual elements of the band. Visa represented the fact that we were going to be a global band, and age symbolized our part in the new age of music. The demos were put aside for a while as Strange and Egan began putting on the infamous Bowie nights, which led to the Blitz Club forming, and Midge joined Thin Lizzy to help out after the departure of guitarist Gary Moore. In 1979, however, Egan, Ure, and Strange reconvened, determined to capitalize on the demos that they had recorded, which were going down well with the new romantic clubbers at Blitz, with Billy Currie joining Dave Formula on keyboards, guitarist John McGilk joining from Magazine, Adamson on bass, Midge on guitar, Rusty on drums, and Strange on vocals. The classic Visage lineup was born, with Rusty's enthusiasm very much the driving force behind them all. I always knew that Midge Ure, Billy Currie, John McGilk, Barry Adamson, and Dave Formula were amazing talents, and that one day everyone else would know it too. He told This Is Not Retro.com in 2010. I also thought Steve Strange was a kind of Pied Piper frontman. Not really a great singer, but that was not as important as his presence. With Rusty very much seeing himself as the band's director, he came up with many of the song ideas, including Block on Blocks, inspired by a visit to the Berlin Wall, and the closing and more ambiently styled track, The Steps. I imposed the rule that it's either ambient or you can dance to it, and the band would just do it. Amazing, really. Early tracks were recorded with the producer Martin Rushent. He was a firm believer in both Visage the band and Visage the upcoming album, and at the time, he was busily constructing his own genetic sound studio in which he would later go on to record the Human League's huge album, Dare. I remember going to his studio just outside of Reading, which wasn't quite finished at the time, Strange recalled of the recordings. It didn't look like anything more than a shed in a rather large garden, yet some fabulous music came out of it, and not just ours. Thanks to Martin's burgeoning studio and Midge and Rusty's equipment, they had access to pretty much the best that studio technology offered at the time. We used everything on that album, Rusty told Sean Rothman in Electronic Soundmaker and Computer Music in 1984. We had a Yamaha GS2, 2 Yamaha Grands, 2 ARP Odyssey synths, about 3 Yamaha string synths, a CS80 Yamaha synth, and a Mini Moog synth. To top off that impressive list, the band also had the run of a Fairlight, a hugely expensive and now classic early sampler. In fact, it was the first one ever to be used in the UK. The Fairlight required the programming expertise of producer Richard James Burgess and was used heavily on the track Fade to Grey. Burgess, incidentally, was one of the members of the band Landscape, who recorded Einstein a Go-Go and later went on to produce Spandau Ballet's first 2 albums. The band therefore had the influence, the technology, the looks, and now the sound to make the most new romantic recording ever. Steve was relatively new to singing, but as the more experienced vocalist, Midge would help him out during the recordings. Midge would be very strict with me, Strange recalled. If I was off-key or got the wrong notes, I would have to do it over and over again. But I didn't mind because we were all trying to make the best album. As the album progressed further, Rusty decided that the feel of the whole recording should resemble one of his DJ sets at the Blitz Club, so set about redirecting the project's pace and flow. I wanted our album to be non-stop with one track leading into the next, he reflects. I was trying to make music to play in my club, and I wanted to make music that was influenced by Kraftwerk and the Yellow Magic Orchestra. It signifies the set I was playing at Blitz. These days, people are interested in music from anywhere in the world, but in those days it had to come from England or the States. Music from Sweden, Germany, and Japan was considered to be laughable. We changed all that. We loved Europe, hence the track Visage. It's why Fade to Grey had the girl singing in French. Richard Burgess produced some of the instrumental links to help tracks blend together, and the girl singing in French was Rusty's then-girlfriend, Brigitte Ahrens. After successfully recording much of the album at Martin Russian's studio, the band had to then complete it with a finance deal with Morris O'Donnell Productions. Rusty explained the deal to Electronic Soundmaker and Computer Music. Visage, the original idea, was made by musicians as a studio situation, so we did a deal with a studio. It happened to be Martin Russian's studio. At one point, there was a chance that the LP would appear on Genetic. That's where the first Visage album was born, and it was completed and mixed for Morris O'Donnell Productions, who in turn were the management of Ultravox. A production company takes a royalty like a producer. Morris O'Donnell said, "We'll pay for you to finish the album." That was all. The songs were already there. Some of this decision appears to have been made in the light of the fact that Tar, the first single, was released through Russian's Genetic Records label via Radar Records, but it failed to make an impact. So, with the album complete in 1979, the band decided they needed a new deal and better distribution than Genetic could offer, so eventually signed to Polydor. However, this meant that there was a year between Tar being released and the next single, Fade to Grey, which came out in November 1980. They therefore needed to make an impact, and because videos were just taking off at the time, it was decided that one for Fade to Grey was essential. It would showcase not only the song, but also Steve Strange's incredible looks, which were becoming so central to the new romantic movement. With the directors Kevin Godley and Lawrence Neal Cream, better known as Lowell Cream, I came up with a storyline for the video, Steve said in Blitzed. My eyebrow turned into a snake, then my arms became a snake, The snake bit me, and I died and faded to grey. The investment in the video, one of the first ever Godley and Cream productions, paid off handsomely, propelling Fade to Grey to top 10 chart positions across the world. Follow-up singles, Mind of a Toy and Visa Age, helped the album shift in numbers. It sold well in Europe, striking gold in Germany with over 250,000 sales. With the same lineup, the follow-up album, The Anvil, was also successful, but it was the debut album Visage that captured the zeitgeist of new romanticism. As Egan said, it was essentially a playlist from the Blitz Club, played for its members and by its members. 10 tracks to take you back to the club that started it all.